Good afternoon, and I'd like to welcome you and call to order our Middlesex County Council meeting for Monday, March the 20th. It's a good day. I think spring arrives a little bit later, so spring is here. Before we get going, agenda. We acknowledge that the land we stand upon today is the traditional territory of the Attawandaron, Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Lenapehoik peoples, who have long-standing relationships to the land, water, and region of southwestern Ontario. The local First Nation communities of this area include Chippewas of the Thames First Nation, Oneida Nation of the Thames First Nation, and Munsee Delaware Nation. The Middlesex County building is on a land within the areas of Treaties 21 and 29 and London Township Treaty 6. We value the significant contributions, both in the past and the present, of local and regional First Nations of Turtle Island. We acknowledge historic and ongoing injustices that Indigenous peoples endure in Canada, and we affirm our commitment to honoring Indigenous voices, nations, and cultures, and to moving forward in the spirit of reconciliation and respect. Is there any disclosure of pecuniary interest? Okay, seeing none. If I can get a mover and a seconder so that we can approve the agenda as presented. Councillor Clark and Councillor McMillan. All in favor? And that's carried. We also need a mover and a seconder that council convene as the committee of the whole at 5 minutes after 1. Councillor Grantham and Councillor Smybert. All in favor? And that's carried. So thank you very much for meeting on a Monday. This is unusual for us, but we do want to get through this budget hopefully today. So with that, I believe I am turning it over to our CAO, Bill.
Right. Okay. How's this working, Greg? Good. Oh yeah, good. Okay, so we'll move to the next slide. It's kind of echoey. Feedback, they'll work on it. Okay, I just want to make we have the opportunity today to do a couple of things. I want to go over process, start really sure and make sure we're all on the same page about what the process was we used. Look at some of the information that was requested at the last meeting, so we have that and we're all on the same page about what that means. I want to talk a lot about some background information, talk a little bit about tax rates and where we are historically. I want to give you sort of like 30 years worth of wisdom on this budget. This is a different budget than other ones I've seen over the past 29 years. And so I'll give you some observations on where we're at. Talk a little bit about the budget recommendations and answer your questions. If the talk to them, go down into any aspect of it. I'm going to ask them to speak for these things as well if you have questions. And then hopefully we get, moving forward with it and we have a good whole discussion. We want it to be casual, but not formal, just casual. And if you have questions as I'm talking, just stop. Is that okay, Kathy, with you? If they have questions, just stop me along the way, and I'd rather answer them as we go along. So, next slide, Greg. The budget committee, we never really did talk about the terms of reference to the budget committee, and that's something that with our new council members, it can be a little bit confusing about what their role. First of all, the role is to have a really wide lens, a county-wide lens, not only just from a photography perspective, but also going time, historical, and what's going on in the county. Having that lens towards the budget is a really important thing. And we also did something a little unique. We did full disclosure budget, meaning every request that came through from department heads, we put on the committee. We wanted everybody to the requests were a service level. And those requests, if you totaled them all, was a 22.12% increase on the tax rate. So the budget committee had a lot of work to do. Normally what would happen is Cindy and I and there's Chris and some others would get those requests and pare it down before it went to the committee a little bit. but not this year. We decided to take it all to them, and that was a process decision that was made with the group. The other thing that the budget committee does is they sort of look at the politics of tax rate increases. What do I mean by that? I mean, well, they have to think about what's going on locally in terms of tax rate increases. There have been times when budget rate increases have been lower based upon going on out there in the general tax world. They have to look at the county's history and have to look at the county and the needs they look at it in very broad detail. They look at reserves, they look at everything to make sure that we're on the right track. Most importantly, they kind of give us a gauge for where the offside line is. You know, is 10.5 too much? Is 1.2 too little? Like, those are political type of things that we can, as an administration, work towards if we know what they are. And we often talk to the budget committee about that. What are the politics of tax rate increases? We also, at the budget committee, look very carefully at impact on service level. For some of our new councillors, number of service level agreements with local municipalities, other organizations. What do budget changes mean to those? Just mean to legislative responsibilities. For example, we have, what am I trying to say, Jess, about Strathmere Lodge? We have service level requirements that are legislated around hours of care per resident. And so we have to look at every single piece of legislation, look at every single rule we have to follow, make sure the budget matches up with those. And we'll talk more about that in a second. But that's really a big job for the committee, is to make sure that the things we've agreed to, we can still do with our service level agreements. And we have a lot of them. We have a lot of them. And we do an assumption check too, because administratively you have to make some assumptions and you have to make some guesses. Like one big assumption that the committee looked at this year was going to happen with planning. What's going to happen with the number of applications? And administratively, we had some thoughts. We had to check that politically. The assumption on that may have been 5 times weeks with planning applications. We heard some thoughts about that. I mean, Michelle shared some thoughts sort of from her perspective about what's going on with east part of the county. And that's really what we use the budget committee for. Are our assumptions online or are we off? And then the other thing is talking about reserve and reserve levels. There was a time in Middlesex County where we had the best reserves of any county in Canada. And that's a problem in itself. We did too well, because then the say, oh, you don't need funding, just use your reserves. And so there was when the budget committee strategically looked at how do we get our reserves to a level out front. And we do a very careful look at our reserve and reserve levels at the committee, because we can't be left with a bridge fund, for example, repair in short order because we don't have the reserve money to do. And probably 100 examples like that we have to look at with the budget committee. So quite a job. Like just the first line alone, or second line alone, of getting down to 22.12, down to something that a possibility is quite a job, and good for them for taking on that task. This was the hardest of the 29 times I think that I've done this to get down there. So next slide, Greg. Now, what are we asking council to do? That's what the budget committee does. We're really asking council to take a really broad look at the issues and challenges. We're not asking you, you can ask questions certainly about what about this, what about that, number of stop signs, whatever you want to ask. But what we're really asking you to do here is to look at what the output was from the committee and say, does it meet broader issues and challenges as I see them? You know, the example is a really good one. You know, we're seeing lots of growth in our areas. I'm not sure it makes sense to move down in terms of the courts. You know, that's the discussion we want to have here. Do recommendations make sense? County lens of what's going on and what you're seeing happen out in the county. It's a real big direction check for us, because is the number that you screen as the ultimate tax rate increase the right assumption, or is that something that can be born in the community and we have to go deeper? So it's a big direction check. Do we have our assumptions correct? Do we need to increase our level or decrease our level of service? These are things that we want to talk about as well. And then give you details, as I mentioned, where requested. Another big thing is that's not terribly evident to a lot of council members and even to members of the public is just how many strategic plans we have. And why does that matter? Well, if you have a strategic plan, well, we have an economic development on that. And you say that the KPIs for that strategic plan, or a previous council may have, or even you, are X, Y, and Z, but our budget doesn't match up with the ability to do X, Y, and Z, then we have to go back and look at our strategic plan. And if so, if our service levels have changed to the point where that doesn't make sense anymore, well, then we have to look at those strategic plans again. There's lots of them. Every single one of the departments has some sort of strategic plan, and then we have an overall. So it's something we can talk about today is where those risk levels will be impacted, where we go, okay, we're probably not going to be able to do X, Y, or Z in these areas with this, and we can talk about those. But that's the kind of stuff we want to have discussion about here at council. So Greg, next on our list is, oh, another thing is, I thought I'd throw this slide in because I think it'd be really great if we did a budget process. One, it'll be a great opportunity to tell everybody how we do it again for our councilors, but also just get feedback from our new councilors and our veteran councilors about process and whether it worked for you. We can do different. So we're planning to do a budget review, a budget process review, and Kathy will give you more details of that as we move forward. Probably we're going to be doing that in the next couple of months. What else we got, Greg? Oh, FTEs. So I know Colin said he didn't have any more questions about FTEs, but I'll just say that for those in the public portion, the vast majority, I don't know the number, but it's over 90% of the FTEs that have for the last 2 years are paramedics. And it's just, that's just the way it is. That's the has FTEs added in other areas. And so I know you have the chart if you have any questions about that, but it's what you'd expect. I think you'd expect that with the number of the call volumes that we've had and the offload delay challenges we've had and the number of new cars we've had to put on, that all of it be eaten up in paramedics. And that's exactly where they're going. Allocation of the levy. I think Mike asked this question, and utilization of services. So let's just look at allocation of levy for a second. Greg's going to push it one forward. Or is that you, Bailey? Who's doing this? Oh, Bales. Sorry, Greg. Bales. So you can see that there's 3 municipalities that have a huge, and so let's start at this. Mike's question was, how is it divided up? And where does it come from? So we don't think of the same way some people do. We don't think of as, I've heard statement in here before where some say, we pay the county, lower tier pays the county. That's not what happens. A levy is not the lower tier paying the county. That would be the same as someone saying a municipality of Ontario for this service, a municipality pays this for service. That's not happening. A levy is on a county resident, and it's just a tax that's being collected on our behalf. Same way as it would province, same way as it would be for the school board. So when if a staff member of yours locally says, pay the county, correct them, that's not actually what happens. You're collecting that money. We're responsible for it. They're on our behalf. So where do we collect it from? It's based upon weighted assessment. And you can see the dollar amounts, the real dollar amounts there on the chart. And you can see the percentages. You can see that there's 3, Middlesex Center has the highest weighted assessment. Strathroy, Caradoc, and Thames Center are close behind. Last time I checked on assessment, Thames Center was coming in very close to Strathroy, Caradoc in terms of percentage. So, and then there's everybody else on that list, but there's 3 that make up almost 70, what is that, 70 some percent of the total. Go back one slide, Greg, or Bales for me. And then utilization is compared to weighted assessment, where the dollars come from. by far, the utilization of service is in Strathroy-Caradoc within that boundary. It is almost an inverse relationship for Thames Centre and Middlesex Centre in terms of services used compared to the assessment that is from those areas. Strathroy-Caradoc won't surprise you as the area where the most services are. If you think about the lodge, that's almost 100%. If you think about social services, say, I'm being conservative and saying 75, it's probably over 80%. Social housing, same thing. You know, I can just keep going down the list. It won't surprise me. Why is that? The exception of one service, I think, which is roads, we do as human services here. And the most number of humans, and it's not weighted assessment, are in Strathroy-Caradoc. And so it's not that surprising that the majority of our services are directed in that direction. And that percentage has actually grown over the years. So I think it was a little bit more balanced when I first started here. I a lot more balanced, but certainly in that area of the county, there's been a growth in the need for services over the last 10 years. I would say that that's really the differentiation has really gotten stronger over the last 10 years for sure. There's also user pay services versus levy services. So this is a good as well, because I know some new councilors said, well, who paid what? Are we going to get a bill for legal services? Yes, you are, because that is a service that's not on the levy. So to the best of my, well, I guess HR would be as an example. There are services that we provide that are user pay. So just in North Middlesex, for example, there'll be some sort of bill that Middlesex pay for helping with their CAO selection of some amount. So that happens, those are one-offs, but all the time, IT and legal are direct to the local municipality, the service that we provide. And in the IT world, it's to everybody, I think, but one municipality. And in the legal side, I think everybody uses it to some degree throughout the course of the year. So most of our services are levy services. It's the costs for those are divided equally by weighted assessment across the entire county, exception to service. Okay, Bills. Moving forward from there. This is a really interesting one. I was giving the warden an example, and I won't use any organization in particular, but the politics of tax rate percentages, it's something that's really easy to fall into. It catches headlines. And I said to the warden recently, I go, you know, would you rather be an organization with a 0% tax increase with what you know is an excessive rate to begin with, or would you rather be that has been so lean that when times come, you have a big number for an increase, but your total tax rate is a lot lower? Well, the answer obviously is you'd rather be the second one that has a tax rate that's much lower, has a bigger percentage increase. Not what's the headlines. You watch. As soon as we say what our tax rate increase is going to be, the average is around 5.5% in the county world. That's what it's going to, and we're going to have our nose above that. There's nothing you can do. Like, if I paid everybody around here $1 million to figure out how to get it down to 5.5, you couldn't do it. Just non-discretionary amounts are going to exceed 5%. No way you could do it. So of that line. And so that will be a headline, even though our tax rate, go ahead, Bills. When you look at our tax rate, where we're starting from, it's excessively low. It has been excessively low for a long time. So if you go one more slide, Bales, if you're in Elgin, for example, your tax rate 60 residential side than ours is right now. And that's a pretty significant sum. If I said, hey guys, for the last 15 years, imagine what we could have done if our tax rate was 60% higher than it is now. Imagine money if you're 60%. That's the exact situation that we're dealing with in comparison to other municipalities. So Like even our closest comparator Huron is 18.23% higher to start with. So my point of this slide is you have a little bit of tax room to go. Each percentage is above the water line from other places. Man, you're starting at a historically low tax rate compared to your comparators, historically low. And this isn't just this, I took this back. Gap was actually wider, much wider for most of the last decade. It's just recently that, you know, a number with Huron, for example, has been under 20. It's just recently for that. But it's been a long time that we have been leading the pack this way in terms of our tax rate. And why? You might ask that question. A lot of the reason had to do with economic development, and it had to do with the conservative nature of our group. The group that we've had for the last 20 years has been very careful to stay within the legislated services that we are required to fund. They've been very careful to think of it from an economic development point of view. If you're a new business moving to town, you're going to ask tax rates. And a lot of the folks who are here believe that the best with economic development was to keep taxes low. And then, of course, you've got the ability to pay argument that many of councillors listen to very carefully, which is you've got to keep your taxes as low as possible because that's got to come up somebody's pocket. And it's been a very, very conservative approach to budgeting for 20 years easily, that, you know, maybe longer. And that's the end result. Okay, and we're moving forward to talk about my observation. I would have liked to start with this because if you think about this budget, and non-discretionary is the story here. This is where, like, I remember going into the committee meeting the first time and I said, guys, we're going to be, you know, 6% probably just from the non-discretionary on the tax. We've never had something like that. It's a massive increase for something you can't control. Now, what talking about this a little bit with our new councillors about CMSM for social housing isn't us. We just get a bill for social housing and we that way likewise the city gets a bill for ambulance and they pay it. That's the way the world works. We trust them to be responsible with social housing dollars and they trust us to be responsible with ambulance dollars. The social housing budget and the land ambulance budgets have both been going through the roof. That's not a surprise to anyone. It's in every newspaper. It's in every region of the country where the demand areas. And so in the last 4-year plan that we got from the city, the social housing numbers were massive in terms of increase. And of course, we know what's going on in the ambulance, same thing. And when you look at that, and then I've included Strathmere Lodge in this. Why would I? Because you can make changes to Strathmere Lodge, but it's kind of similar to the province sets the standard, and if we have to come up here because it's something we have no choice. I was talking about of care per resident, have to invest in that to meet those legislative requirements, and the dollars that were capital dollars, the new operating dollars at the lodge, I would say are non-discretionary. You don't have any control over. We all get in a lot of trouble if we don't meet those standards and something happens. So, you know, right off the bat, 50% of the increase that you're looking at is related to stuff that nothing you can do about it. You can be here a long time, you can't touch it. There's just no way for me to put that power in your hands. So that's a tough place to start. And that was a tough place for the budget committee. And I think it did impact the budget committee because then you have to look at the discretionary stuff 10 times whole with the non-discretionary. And we did look at everything extremely aggressively, I think, this year compared to other years. Fails? Another budget observation is that there was assumptions made that we had the luxury before, I think, whenever we didn't have some budget features of not having to make assumptions. I'll give you an example. You want about planning. Some days you read that housing starts and planning applications are going to go down, and some days you read the budget committee made an assumption that it's going to at least flatline and start to stabilize. Whether that proves to be true or not, we don't know. But normally in a budgetary year where you have a little flexibility, you'd wait a year to sort of see before you made an assumption that could go either way, or you saw a trend line. But we made a bunch of assumptions here in this budget out of necessity. Had to make some decisions that would get that number down. Huge amount of reserves. Like it takes, a decade to get the reserve levels to where they are, but you're using a lot of reserves this year to get down to a number that is, and I want you to know that, and it's not sustainable here. There's a finite time, and you have services that are underfunded now. In fact, I was asked this question: how many of our services are underfunded? I would argue every single one of our to other services is underfunded. Doesn't matter where you look. She's not here. We can pick on HR. I mean, the for HR, PS are not being met. The standard met for Strathmere Lodge not being met. We don't have the that we need. Everybody agrees with that, and I can stretch that into finance, into provide. About even the legal. We're down to lawyers now. There are a quarter of our size that have 3, and everybody's being do more with less. There's no question. The budget committee knows that, but it's not. We're really going to struggle with year because we're going to be right back if offload delays don't change and change. We're going to be right back here next year having the exact same conversation with a couple $1 million less in reserves and looking at the same type of situation. That's what we're going to be faced with. And still having every service area telling you, rightfully, it's science. You can see it compared to other places. They're underfunded. And that's going to be a challenge that you're going to have. This year is going to look, if those other numbers don't change, this year is going to look like a happy day. In call volume and offload delay. So that's my observation, is that we're using a lot of reserves. We may look like our number's palatable, but if our number wasn't being supported by reserves, it would be, I forget what that number is, but anyways, Cindy will look it up. But I mean, it would be much higher than what it is, and you can't sustain that forever. My tax rate observation I've already provided to you. We are very lean, and the warden and I talk about this often. I don't sitting over there, or like anybody bring any organization, and the first thing they say is, "Wow, you guys are doing lean," and they're not wrong. We did a comparison with one of our services with another health service in the area, and it was just amazing. It was amazing how limited the resources were compared to other organizations. And credit to everybody that's in the room that we're able to make this happen, but it's not sustainable either. Like the lean can only last so long, and then you're going to run into trouble. And the warden would argue we started to. I think he would say that during COVID, our leanness and our lack of capacity to cover off and do other things did cause some organizational stress that has set us back a little bit. And I don't want you to think we're fat cats here. By any measure, we're very, very lean. This is another thing that is really, really nervous for me, is population and the aging population. If you look at the demographics you're getting a lot of, they're still coming. The immigration pipeline, we were just talking with Monty last week. The immigration pipeline is still coming this way, and it's not headed towards Toronto. It's headed towards places like Kamoka, and it's headed towards places like Thames Center. And that's on top of the fact that you're already the fastest growing census region in Canada. Like how many people are coming here, all of the age and demographic, where they're going to be requiring human services. The usually demographically doesn't require as much is when you're between that 37 to 47 to 57 range, you're not using as many services, but getting the bottom and the top of that range, and human services demand is going to be in this going forward. And that really makes me nervous because I think we're ready for it with how lean we are right now. Inflation, obviously scary. I think whenever people hear about inflation, they think about the price of gas, they think about the price of lumber, but they look at that number, that 6% number, 8%, whatever the year-over-year inflation number is now, and they say, oh, well, maybe that's what the increase should be. The problem we have is that municipal price of asphalt increase, or something. Well, you're seeing general inflation happen at a number that is in that 6 to 8 range, or 5, 6, 8 range. Most of the things we from the price building roads and bridges into double digits on average. Here, when you asphalt, a 40 to 50% increase in that, because I think most people think about, oh, the price of diesel for running your vehicles around, but I'm less worried about that and way more worried about the cost of materials from all the way through. So inflation has not changed. In fact, if anything, it's gotten a little worse in the first part of 2023. And we're going to be in real trouble next year if it keeps. So I mentioned how there's greater pressure perhaps next year, but this is really interesting as well. There's so many unknowns. Called me, I don't know, like a few months ago, said, Bill, what are we doing about the loss? Might have been an email, loss of conservation authority services for planning. Great question. This was like well before we had almost when it was early out of the great question. We still don't really have a plan, and that's because we're still waiting for direction on whether or not there's other options. And how do you budget when you don't even know? Like some of my colleagues in other counties who are in situations are going out there and hiring a person already. Well, we don't even know if we should be. We don't even know if that's the rule. We just don't know, and we probably won't know for a little while yet. It's the unknown we have. Provincial budget's coming out. We already know from our MPs and our cabinet ministers around here, MPPs and our cabinet ministers, this is going to be a very lean budget. We shouldn't expect any bailout of provincial government or many of the things. In the past, that hasn't been the case. We've seen COVID dollars come in to help in bad budget times lately. We've seen other things come in to help that fit easily into our budget, but I don't expect any of that this year. I don't expect any white knight to come along and from the province and throw a bunch of money. Brian?
Bill, if I can, you talked about the conservation and the changes there. Do you think it's going to have a bigger impact at the county level or at the lower tier?
Dirk?
I think it certainly is going to affect both. It's any planning application. I think that the county file subdivisions condominium tend to have more natural heritage features than say a surplus dwelling consent or something like that. But for sure, there will be an impact at both levels.
Yeah, so on the provincial budget, I'm not too sure about, and then surplus, we're not too sure about. We have a much better sense of our own surplus than the other items on that list, but still lots of. And then Cindy just gave me that number. Hadn't used reserves, our tax rate increase would be 13.5. So that's quite a bit of percent you're eating up by using reserves, and we don't get them back. So once they're gone, they're gone. So that's a big number. Okay, Bills, what else we got? Oh, sorry.
Can I pop in? Can you put the last slide back, Chris? So one area, if we want to talk about observations, that you really didn't hit on, but you've alluded to it a couple of times with doing more with less. You've talked about our non-discretionary funding, or what we have to pay for. And then, the very lean point. So there are a couple of areas where we have invested in areas that is not, it is non-discretion, it is discretionary, excuse me. Like the clean water program that we have paid for in the past through the planning department. We've had requests come, and I guess the budget committee did talk at great length about the extras and how if we open the door to still continuing to fund some of these extras, what does that do for us?
Yeah, it's great. I'll give you a historical perspective on it. I said one at another presentation that if you sat in my chair long enough, you'd hear a million great ideas, a million great ones that are better for the community, make the community better. One of my favorites is a respite center. Like that was a great idea. It's just not in our area of responsibility and very expensive. I've heard great ideas of so many different projects. Hospital fund. There's, oh boy, wouldn't that be great? Well, again, it's provincial responsibility, but lots of counties out capital dollars other places. Traditionally here, our council has held the line very, very tight. Kat mentioned one that was outside of our legislative responsibility, the clean water program. And I think the dollar amount was so small, it wasn't even a rounding error on our, but I don't remember any others. And that's another reason why our tax rate's so low compared to others. And generally what happens is whenever, I guess I'm going back to hospital cap, there's a really good example. For a while where it was going through a lot of different places, right, Cap? The challenge with that is reason why was because there was contemplation about doing something else outside the leg. So then people read the paper, oh, now this council is going to go outside the legislative framework to fund things that are great for the community, and they're not wrong, they're great for the community. I'm going to come to. And so, yeah, my prediction is that the moment you take a toe over that line, you're going to get a floodgate of all the great ideas that usually arrive at my office and I go, oh, that's not in our legislative response. Because there really are some great ones. It's just when you sit in my chair, you look at it and go, okay, we're responsible for childcare. Others spend money on something not responsible for, or put 5 more childcare spots in to help the economy here in Middlesex, London. I know exactly where I go. Like, there's no question, because I'm not joking with you when I tell you in every one of our services, there's like 38 or 36 of them were underfunded. And so it's hard to imagine funding outside of that envelope. But anyways, that is the history of it. It usually comes in waves. You get the first one, and then there'll be something else, something else. It'll all come to you in about 5 months, I think, Gordon, the moment that you take a walk across that line. The big numbers are pretty staggering. I've never, like, this is the first time I've seen numbers like this, as I mentioned a few times. An 8.41% tax rate increase. Now, what does that mean? Levy number. A levy number is much easier to understand. 11.19% or 5.2 million is exactly the amount of new dollars that is going into the county. That's how much more money to get to operate this year. Now, how come it's 8.41 for a tax rate? Because we've used reserves and growth at 8.4. Well, we've used growth. Sorry, the other one used reserves too, but we've used growth to get that number down to 8.41. And as I mentioned, total use of reserves is almost 2.5 million. That's pretty rare as well. That's a big number for us to have go out the door. What does a tax rate increase of 8.41 mean to the owner? Well, just for what your house, the current dollars, it's going to be $334.50, because on $100,000 of investment, $3. So pretty simple math to figure out. So that's where we are, and that's a bit of a history of how we got here. It's been a bumpy road, but it hasn't been before. This hasn't not been a bumpy road until this year. And the number one story is it's because of those non-discretionary costs that grow to sort of an Asian number that we've never really seen before. Okay, so we'd like to use this portion of the meeting to answer any questions you have, stimulate some conversation, I think, Warden, and Cindy and I and whoever else, department heads, here to help with any questions that you.
Okay, thanks for that, Bill. And I will open it up to discussion. Observations? Questions? Councillor Brennan.
Are there some things that we can do to, like Strathmere Lodge, raise the rates there for residents, or ambulance? I like it's $45 for an ambulance ride. Do we have the power to increase that sort of stuff to try to bring in more revenues?
No. Neil, you want to talk about the act and rates? Give everybody a picture of that.
Thank you, Bill. Through you, Warden, to the councillor. So the $45 ambulance bill is actually a legacy under OHIP, and out of that $45, it's first of all billed by the receiving hospital. $30 of that 45 remains with the hospital if they're able to collect it, and the remaining 15 is sent back to the province of Ontario. So Middlesex County receives none of those funds.
Yeah, so we could increase the price per trip to $1 million and you still wouldn't see a penny of it. And it's for a very similar question we get asked on the planning. There are some fees that we talked about, Dirk, a little bit too, but the revenue goes back to the lower tier municipality, so it doesn't really help with some of those costs. We have looked at legal costs and about whether those can rise to try and help offset that, but we're talking peanuts compared to the things you're mentioning, and I wish we could. But in terms of revenue, I'm trying to think, Cindy, were there other areas we're looking at? No, I think that's it.
It would just be information technology and legal services where we're billing back.
Right, Bailey. So you want to talk about what's going to happen there?
Thanks, Bill. Yeah, this year we are working to renew the service agreements with the 6 supported local municipalities. We're doing an assessment of the last 5 years, reviewing a number of items, tickets, time spent, and we're going to use that to come up with a number and provide that to the local municipalities to continue providing services. One of the things we have in place as well, we call the SOW process, which is statement of work. Anytime a local municipality we support requests something new, we assess what that thing would be, and we provide them with a cost to implement that service, as well as an ongoing cost to support whatever we may have implemented for them, which does increase the yearly revenues that we get from the local municipalities we support.
But yeah, so we are trying to look at all of those, our service level agreements, and make sure they're appropriate and make sure that we're at least doing cost recovery. And that's another thing too, that the committee actually had to wrestle with for the first time ever. We've had a common taxpayer approach to everything. And so it didn't matter to us whether or not we had more costs for planning and that increased revenue locally, or it didn't matter as long as the and I think now for the first time with this budget, to look at how can we balance off, like legal costs, another good example. If the revenue that Wayne's bringing in to help local municipalities, that isn't a perfect match, that's okay, because it's a common taxpayer approach. At least it's benefiting county resident, even if it's hurting the county budget by $60,000, just for a round number. And the committee's challenged everybody to say, okay, revenues in line with our costs so that it's not impacting the county budget and providing a benefit to the residents.
Absolutely. Any other comments? Councillor McGuire.
Thank you, Madam Warden. So through you to the CAO and possibly over to our Director of Planning and Development, I'm still concerned and just looking for a little bit more insight about Bill 23 and the conservation area work that they're currently doing for us, which I understand is going to stop by the summertime. And if that is correct, all the municipalities within our county are going to be faced with somehow picking up that work. So I'm still wondering if that is best done at the county level, or is it going to be picked up individually at everybody else's level? So Strathroy Caradoc, being fairly large, could probably undertake that, but at the county level, there may be other municipalities that this could be more of an encumbrance for. So again, from that county perspective, is it something we should be looking at now? Or if we're not, how would we look at it come summer, if and when that problem arises?
Yeah, so I'll just start by giving you some perspective on what other counties are doing. And I would say that they're seeing the same thing you are. Something that's best done. It is hard to make the economics of that work in a lower tier municipality with the amount of planning work, because it's a fixed cost with a variable, and that's hard. So if the more you spread those costs out over a variable revenue stream, the better I get. And so all that I'm aware of is taking that approach. Now, specific question though, Dirk, what are we going to do? You want to talk a little bit about April and about some of that stuff?
Certainly through the warden. I guess just maybe for those watching to be clear, that the rules changed as of January 1st. Actually, on the December 28th, the announcement was made and it was effective January 1st. So we had all expected it was going to be a year implementation time period, and it ended up being 3 days. The conservation authorities have sort of oscillated on what their approach is going to be to this. And I think they're all settling on the fact now that they're going to be out of this business largely. And they're starting to give dates, as you mentioned, sort of end of June, that they're going to, even for legacy files, matters they were already involved in. Right now, they're still assisting, but I think they're going to be backing away from that very shortly. So I did give budget committee sort of a high level idea of options, and certainly one that some municipalities are doing is to hire. I'm not based on the information I have, I'm not convinced it's a full-time position, even for all the work across the county, to be frank. But it certainly isn't, in my opinion, a full-time position for a local municipality to bring that on board. Second option is to engage with conservation authorities in some manner. And the third would be to engage with another municipality or some other body. And the fourth would really be just to use outside consultants. So I am looking into that. I've been talking to other municipalities in the region and what our options might be on that. We also understand, I think in the maybe April or May, the province are going to be undertaking the next step in the housing reform. And so there is likely going to be significant potential for more change on this topic. So all that to say, we're sort of in this in-between period where I don't have a great recommendation to commit to. At least my advice to the committee was not to hire someone immediately and then try to find the work for them. It was to see what happens. And if we need to limp through a little bit using consultants in the short term, I think that's probably the best approach. And then the final thing that I've been talking to some other municipalities about is just how we can perhaps back end some of the things that the Conservation Authority used to do. So maybe we're going to have to look, instead of having all of those decisions, all of that information known before you make a decision, say on a plan of subdivision, maybe we have enough known to proceed, and then we have draft plan conditions that require further analysis, and that is the bill for that is footed by the developer. So maybe that's a long-winded way to say I don't have a great answer for this. I'm working on it, and I think in the next month or two we'll have a better and more information out of the province.
If I can just jump in, Councillor McGuire, to kind of give you some context of what we discussed at the budget committee, because Dirk's absolutely right. He gave us a number of scenarios that until there's a clear picture, we don't know when that's going to be, that, how it could be kind of piecemealed together. But I think the overlying thought too was that, yeah, this could be a cost that now is borne to the local municipalities. They could pass that cost on to the developer, however that works. But for us, the key to that is also that we have to remember that the application fees that come into the into our local municipalities, those revenues stay with our local municipalities. And so there is a way if a local municipality wanted to fund those, that they do have revenues that come in that could cover that until something becomes clearer. Because those revenues don't come to the county. As Bill explained, the monies that we collect from the local municipalities comes from the end user.
I think the most scenario is going to be that we're going to end up hiring a person for the broader area and bill local municipalities those costs that they can then be passed on to developer. And that's just a downloaded cost. That's exactly what the province really intended, wanted there to be a downloaded cost here. But we still have to wait to see what the province says, as Dirk said, about before we make that step. So it's not as critical to me on the planning budget to have that number in there, because I think ultimately it's going to be a shared cost, but billed back on a per use basis to the municipalities whenever the time comes, be my guess, if it's something we do. There are other things though in planning that you can see here, just to talk a little bit about the planning budget for a second, and then I'll turn it over to Dirk. But this is one of the most challenging ones for the committee, because nobody has a crystal ball, and what a state of flux planning and housing, everything's in. You know, if you listen to the province, we're building a gazillion new homes. If you listen to the economists, there's not going to be another built for a long time. Like, I mean, it very, very different opinions on what's going to happen here. What we do know is this: our current trend line in terms of planning applications has not slowed down. There's a bit on the committee that will happen. Dirk has talked about how in times of slowdown in construction, it's often a time where planning applications pick up. So it's a really tough one, especially since this is an area where we have cut some costs. And it is one that I'm a little nervous about, because it's based upon an assumption. I think based on an assumption, if the trend line keeps going with planning applications, we're going to be really underfunded in this. If it slows down and levels off, we're going to be just fine. But Dirk, you want to take the conversation from there for a second?
I'm not sure where you want me to go with that, to be honest, Bill. We
I just
talked
want-
a lot about.
I just want you to talk about what you're seeing currently, and then these changes that we made to the budget that you recommended, what it means in terms of service levels. I'll probably talk about this.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for the clarification. Certainly in terms of numbers, you know, the building permits substantially dropped off the end of last year, and I don't have a great sense yet of as where they are so far this year. Planning applications, I think we were down about 15 local applications across the county compared to the average. I'm a big believer in averages, because one year over the next things go up or down, and we don't have any control, of course, as to who comes in the door. So 15 applications across the county is a pretty small difference. Plans of subdivision, condominium, those larger files, those numbers were still up last year, as you'd expect. They've been very robust the last 2 or 3 years. We aren't seeing that slow down yet. But again, it really is dependent on developers and when they want to come in the door. The last time, I've been around long enough that the last time things slowed down, and this Bill alluded to this, subdivision activity really doesn't slow down. That the sift-ins and those sort of developers, they still work on these things because they know at some point things are going to pick up again, and then they want to have that product ready. The planning part of it is arguably the cheap part of the process. It's getting it all ready, getting the engineering done, and then to being ready to sort of flip the switch and start construction. So in terms of the other items, my eyes are not great in this lighting here, but yeah, there was a contingency that had been included for this for the conservation authorities, just not knowing for that conservation authority review, not knowing where that was going to be. The Woodlands matter was the clean water program, and that is a project that has been over the last number of years funded from it's the fees that we realized through the prosecution of Woodlands offenses. We did talk a year ago at this time that we had sort of exhausted most of those fees, so a portion of that needed to come from operations this year. So that item was removed, and a summer student, and then the planner position.
Say in terms of regular service levels, the planner position is the one cut back the most, biggest impact on service levels. If, and I hope I'm saying this right, Warden, but if applications continue to go at the current pace, then we will see I think that's okay to say. I think that's right. If there isn't same number of applications, will be just right. Where we're also going to see just one more Michelle, before you go, is special projects. What special projects? That's official plans. That's the work that we do for lower tiers. And there's a number of those that go on throughout the year. We know we're falling behind in some of those, Dirk. Is that fair? And okay, you say.
I would say generally, we've actually, over the last 3 years, we've probably done more project work and gotten more done in the 10 years. If I could pat our staff and consultants and local municipalities in the back. It's not just our staff, of course. But I think there's a general feeling when I talk to local municipalities, CAOs, especially that we can't kind of wait 5 or 10 years to do project work anymore, that things are changing rapidly enough that you need to sort of be on those, be on top of those topics as they occur.
So there's an area where I think we felt that it was important to start cutting back and maybe changing the service standard. We have service agreements for planning, but maybe that's the kind of thing you have to renegotiate with municipalities and say, you've got all this revenue coming in. You want it at a faster pace than we can provide. And sometimes it is very cyclical, and the timing of this, you don't want to have a bunch of employees sitting around. You may want to use consultants for this. In our experience, it's starting to feel like that's a back for themselves, those special projects. So I'd say that's one area that we're going to look at in terms of making some service level changes. Michelle?
Thanks, Bill. You might have just answered my question. And I appreciate the overview. That was really quite helpful, I thought. And I know that the budget committee worked hard to get those numbers down. That's not an easy task. I guess my concern was around planning. And you're making the assumptions based on the best information that you have at that time. That certainly didn't figure into the recent announcement, right, with Volkswagen, which we think will have a big impact. So that was going to be my question is, so what's the backup plan if we were to see, those applications surge? But I guess what I'm hearing from Bill is that perhaps internally, we need to maybe take a look at other ways we can get that work done with not always necessarily relying on the county.
I think for special projects, that would think for regular planning work, we'd ever want that to be the case, because we haven't helped any taxpayer. The whole goal of putting this on a levy and doing it this way is to help taxpayers. If we force you to go out by not meeting the service standard for regular planning work to hire somebody that is an added cost, we've actually lost money for the taxpayer doing that. That's a real detriment when you look at the common taxpayer approach. So I would say that it would be great if council said, listen, we're not sure. We either like the approach of making that assumption that things are going to slow down and we're going to stick with this, or we're concerned about that. And I think the net impact is not very high. It's like 27,000 or something. The net impact, because we had another number in there for a different employee. Anyways, I don't think the net impact's very high. And that's the kind of direction we're looking for. That's what we want everybody to comment on. I think that's fair work.
I guess we talked in the committee in the best or worst case scenario, depending on which side you're looking at it. That if the plan keeps going that strong, that Dirk may have to come before council and request another planner. I mean, if throughout the year, if that's the way it goes and it does end up going up or certainly not lowering, we had that conversation. I think Sue, you can confirm that too, that we did talk about this is our best idea right now or our best thinking right now, but we have to be prepared at council for any of these departments that they may have to come before us and say, we're swamped. We're going to have to do something. And we'll have to look at that from a council standpoint.
Thank you, Warden. Just comment to both you and the CAO. Thank you for the budget. I know it was a lot of work, and actually I'm sitting here with my county council hat on, but I need to tell you that I have this little person on my shoulder looking at it from as head of council in the municipal lens, but I'll hold those questions till I return back to Strathroy. But when I look at it, it's begging me some questions from a local level to see if there are ways I can save. our municipality money, but it's probably not appropriate to ask him here as a county councillor, but I should share that with you, that I have all kinds of questions that are percolating, but I'll wait till we get back to Frank Street and I'll ask those questions.
The number one thing I think that you have to worry about is mentioned when Michelle asked the question. I don't want everybody to have to go out and hire another planner to keep your service level where you want it to be. I'd rather we hire or here, because sure that this helps the county budget. And fair if it happens. So that's what you guys need to figure out, is because the data is
Well, there's a range between the 47 to the 27,000.
yeah. So you know, it's a number, but it's not. This isn't one of those things. It's $1 million decision. This is we had to look at everything, and we had to make some aggressive assumptions at that table, and this is one of them. So we'd love your feedback on it over the course of this discussion.
Through the warden, just to further comment on Brian's comment, there was much discussion, as Dirk can confirm, regarding a consultant rather than a full-time FTE employment, because once you have them on staff, then you've got this expense that you're maybe going to carry forward that you may not need going into the future.
Right. So planning is definitely one of those areas where we're a little about the impact of the changes on service levels. I think that's fair in both the, you know, I think that correctly, and you're hearing us correctly. I'd say there's other areas as well. We definitely made a change in the legal department that might, in terms of the total number of lawyers that we have, and that might have an impact upon, well, it obviously will have some institutions, and it's the key for local municipalities, and it's still an open question how much the service level will be impacted, but definitely will be. Wayne, do you want to talk about that?
Sure, Bill. I mean, surely there will be an impact. I mean, upon discussions at budget committee, I have a plan in place to bridge that, and there's a strategy to address that, which I think will be okay there. But you know, some particular questions on that, I'm happy to take if there's particular questions on it. But
no, I think it's just fair to say that we don't really have a plan that replaces the person we lost with another full person. So there will be impacts upon service timing in some form or fashion. And I would say likewise in most of the departments where they forward ideas and they didn't approve, like for another example is the economic development strategic plan. There's a number of Tara's budget that she was hoping would get implemented that are in with the economic development strategic plan. This is not the department often gets picked on because most discretionary of the discretionary services we provide. And so that's the first place that usually the budget committee looks to cut back. So Kara, do you want to talk about the impact on the economic development strategic plan? And Greg will move the slide down to economic development.
Through you, Warden, to council and through the CIO. Couple of impacts. So you'll see here that the impacts on the economic development budget are primarily HR related. Just to remind you, the economic development strategic plan that Bill has referenced on multiple occasions ties directly into the strategic plan of the county. And in two very specific sections, two of the main focuses of your overarching strategic plan are one, cultivating community vitality, and two, strengthening our economy. And a few of these things, of course, although they're purely HR related, do tie into that. One of the things that we need to keep in mind is the fact that the County of Middlesex does hold the position as the destination marketing organization for tourism for the entire area. And with that comes some specific responsibilities. And so one of the suggestions was that we look at the creation of a tourism officer this year. We do not have a purely focused tourism position within the department. We haven't since we became the DMO 8 years ago. And that position actually, and the impact of it was actually less than $5,000 in terms of a shifting, as the suggestion to the budget committee was that we actually elevate an internal position to the tourism officer and thereby eliminate the current marketing and communications position and have that elevated. So that's the impact of that, is that we would not have a focused tourism position, which would be my recommendation. The other piece, I guess, to mention, it's very minor in terms of overall, emphasis on the budget, is the fact that we do have a piece of our strategic plan overarching within the cultivating community vitality, which talks about attraction, retention, and engagement of our youth. And so thereby, by eliminating our young positions, our summer positions, it does eliminate the opportunity for someone to have that opportunity to work within the municipal environment at the county level, and works into some of our succession, obviously, as well. So that's just, minor impact, but something to bring about. Finally, I would say overall, looking at the recommended position of the manager, that's where we're not going to see impacts in terms of the programs that are delivered at the county level. What we will say is that there will be an impact in terms of the level of support that can be provided and the direction that can be provided to local staff. As you know, many of the local municipalities either do not have an economic development position that's being funded, or they have a part-time position that oftentimes is combined with other things. And those people do require some support from our department to guide them in the directions that they need. And that is one of the things that will not be able to be provided at that same and increasing level that it's been requested.
Perfect. So I think that's a really good overview. And one thing that the budget committee had to do was, when you're looking at this kind of magnitude, there's no sense counting the number of vehicles that are being purchased. You got to go after the bone. And that is a lot of, this is the first time I've ever seen this many positions. I thought Colin's question was FTEs, because now we're actually, reducing FTEs for a community growing as fast as ours. That's a real challenge. And program that was growing as fast as Kara's, we now know we're not going to be able to keep pace with what was in the strategic plan. I want to give Chris a chance. I do want to say one other thing, that something Wayne said triggered my brain on. We've had a action, but we're going back and we're looking at how we can try our best to maintain service levels. I'll tell you that when you're trying to get rid of, 12% of an increase to get down to a reasonable number, everybody's doing that now. I think up until this point, we've all been operating lean, but now everybody's going back and looking at their plans and saying, how can I reevaluate? How can I do something different? Kara's going to have to do that big time now. Wayne's going to have to do that big time. Even the people that had huge increases, and said were the non-discretionary areas. Another 25% of increase is in roads. That's huge, just from one department. But everybody has to go back, and we've challenged, I think the budget committee has challenged every department head to go back and see what it means to their strategic plan, see what it means to their delivery, and try to do more, I guess, with less. Warren, you want to say something?
Yeah, no, I think I'm going to sound like I sounded 3 years ago at this time in the beginning stages of the pandemic, is that, the challenges that we have in front of us also do provide great opportunity for the departments to look at agreements that we have with our local municipalities, with how we are delivering service. To some extent, maybe those haven't been reviewed for a number of years. Is this how service should be delivered in 2023, or should it be done differently? What responsibility should the local municipalities have? So, as the doom and gloom is out there, this can also, this is the year to also look for the opportunity. And again, it will strengthen them. Because Bill's right. 2024, I don't think is going to be a much different, the discussions around the table are going to be much different. But the department heads and the departments could be in a much better position of painting a much different picture of their department, how it's delivered and what it looks like, not only for the county, but for the lower tiers.
said, and so Chris, I know one of the areas, the fact that, a big chunk from your department, there's a lot that we off table. So you want to just talk about that? Well, I think Greg's found it already. Yep.
Yeah, you put it down there. Thanks, Greg. Thanks, Bill. And Bill's really hit the nail on the head with a couple of things from where we struggle with our increase. And the increase is not from the roads department, is not an increase in our level of service or our deliverables. The increase is to maintain our road and bridge network in its existing condition, and it's to maintain our existing level of service on road maintenance. We really are at the whim of factors that are outside of our control. In the summertime, it's oil prices. So our diesel costs, asphalt cement costs, production of different types of construction materials is really outside of our control. We try to do a good job at giving you a fair and reasonable estimate of what those costs are going to be. I think it was apparent last week when we closed all our tenders that our staff are doing a good job at anticipating what the marketplace is for construction materials. Even so, we were still underestimating costs of cold in place asphalt recycling, which is a big part of our program. The other side of the equation is the weather. And in the wintertime, that is the driver for our winter maintenance expenditures. Unfortunately, this year we thought was going to be better. And of course, as soon as I made a recommendation to reduce the budget, we are seeing our budget get pushed. Unfortunately, our winter weather has happened on sort of off days, so weekends, which puts additional pressure on our resource costs in order to man our winter maintenance equipment. Also trying to provide a budget where we don't see massive spikes from year to year. One of the things I think roads officials across Canada and likely across North America are going to struggle with is the rapid aging of our bridge infrastructure. And I'm trying to create an environment in which I don't come to council year to year with massive swings in the expenditures on capital replacements to our bridge infrastructure. You can see we did do a reduction this year of about 1.3 million in future investment in our bridge infrastructure, but that will have to be made up next year and in future years, just simply due to the fact that we are seeing, in some cases, almost 100% increase in cost for bridge replacement projects that we estimated, 2 years ago are really almost doubling in price. So this is not unique to Middlesex County. Obviously, I think we're all feeling these pressures. We're doing what we can from where I sit in order to provide you with sort of a smooth transitional budget to hopefully not continuing increases in prices year to year for how we do business, but also just to provide you with what council and what our residents expect when they drive on Middlesex County roads, that our roads are in good shape, that they're clean and they're safe to travel. And we continue to maintain Bill said, a very lean operation. We have added one full-time equivalent position in 20 years that I've been with the county. So, and we've assumed a lot of roads in that time. So we're doing more with less, absolutely. But understanding the challenges across the board, we're doing what we can in order to keep that budget down. It's the first time in a long time where we've actually drawn from roads reserves to help lower the impact on the budget. But I do recommend doing that at this time because the huge increase in costs we've seen year to year.
Yeah, and if you're wondering, you're looking at your travel plans and saying, boy, the weather's terrible. I wish I was somewhere else. It's terrible because he said at the committee, we've had a pretty good winter so far. I think we can reduce this. And then everybody went, boom. Yeah, like it was like that weekend.
Yes. So
It
the
was that
recommend,
weekend and I looked out the window and went,
so the recommendation that's not up there is that if that is an option, it's supposed to be done, with sign language or the blinking of the eyes. So we don't mention those words.
But this is the first time where I have felt in this department that we're under. And what I mean by that is we have a recommendation that we've been following for a long time in terms of be repaired, how much to put in reserves to structure. Is the first year my heart skipped a beat with this budget. And Brian, we talked a lot about it at the budget committee and went over it a lot. We now in terms of preparedness for everything else. for some sort of event. Brian, I don't know if you want to mention sort of your.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. Well, first of all, I want to say I was really glad to see those tenders that came in and how close staff was with their estimates. And that's really kudos to you and the staff, because I was a little concerned about that because I knew where we were sitting and I thought those tenders alone could have killed us on the budget. But we talked about this, and we even talked at one point of going deeper into this department cutting, and it really, we got talking as a committee, we're cutting past the bone. You know, that if, Chris made a comment that if a bridge were to let us down, we wouldn't have the money there. We would have to actually go borrow money to fix it if it's one of the larger structures. And I know we have spent a number of years to get the bridge reserves up to $4.5 million a year. And this year, Chris was at $6.5 million, and we did cut it back to 5.2, but it does have to go back up over that $6 million. And it's not just about one municipality. There's some very expensive bridges out there that'll have to be done. But we talked in length on this department just because of the cost to us. But it is a core service. And if we go, I think we're as deep as we can go without being at a scary level where we don't have the money to cover unexpected
And
costs.
we've been together doing this, and I don't know that we've ever used the term scary level before. It tells you sort of what kind of a budget year it is. And so I appreciate those comments, Brian. Yeah, go ahead.
Just a comment, at the committee, we consider it a safe room. So sometimes we say things a little more bluntly than we do here. But it is very much, and it's every department. I want to say that, as a member of the committee, I'm really glad to see that the senior staff are still talking to me, because it was tough, right? And we're cutting into everybody. We're challenging us all to do better, not just staff, but us as a council as well. So that's just my thoughts.
Well, Lindsay, are you still talking to everybody? Because maybe just give us comments on the challenges in your budget and where we are with some of those cuts.
Absolutely. So looking at the library budget, you'll see the reductions there that we were able to come to. So the first one on the list was our staffing contingency, and this is part of the budget. I think it's kind of unique to the library that we do typically carry a contingency. That's been the historical practice. And so this relates to having that contingency backup, particularly for our full-time positions, where if we don't have those frontline staff, and that's where really half of our full-time positions are, then, we need a certain number of bodies, a certain number of people to keep our branches open. So this is a unique line to the library, but we were able to find some reductions there that we can manage for the year. We had a good discussion with the committee about collections and kind of what the future is for things like DVDs. And so this is a reduction, that $10,000 that we feel comfortable we're able to manage that, because our use of that collection has changed, especially throughout the pandemic. Our computer hardware replacement. So looking to defer purchases for $63,000. So what we'll be focusing on for the year is replacing all of our computer workstations, maintaining that replacement schedule, because those are the items that are used the most. We do have over 100 computers around at our branches and used by staff as well. So it is always a significant budget item, but we will be able to defer replacing things like iPads, printers, copiers, some of those other kind of peripherals. Those purchases will, of course, be deferred to the next year. So everything just kind of shifts down.
And that actually brings me to another thing that makes me nervous is you'll see defer a lot. You see, there's a day of reckoning for defer is just another term for a day of reckoning, but we didn't have it this year. That's what next year is that there are a lot of items deferred, but the realistic situation is we're at the top end of where you can be with a tax rate percentage increase. I think politically and otherwise, you do we have a lot of to do in terms of tax rate and the needs that are out in the community. I hope you're getting a sense of that from some of the department heads. Warden, I don't know, we can take some more questions, but we have a recommendation up there as well. We should probably debate at some point. Are more questions? Other folks, we put Neil on the hot seat. That's my favorite thing to do every Monday morning.
I guess I'm looking to see if there's any further comment from from council. The recommendations are in front of you. Councillor Clark.
I just have one last comment through the warden. For those that weren't on the budget committee, we've actually challenged each department for next year. Like they have to do the work this year. This piggybacks on something Kathy said earlier, is you really need to do a deep dive into each of your departments, because next year, as Bill says, it's not going to be any easier because we are deferring a lot of capital projects. So, and having to replenish our bridge reserves, so which is very important.
What am I talking about?
Yes, the next steps in this are really to introduce the bylaws that would be approved at the March 28th meeting, which is next week. Yeah. Is it? What's the date today? Yeah. Yeah, so we're getting close.
But I guess there are recommendations that the committee has made to get to this 8.41. And the option is that, obviously we receive everything for information, and then either you recommend the passing of the bylaw, or are there recommendations that you want to look at differently? That would be the question. Brian.
I would move that we accept the 8.41% increase.
Councillor Grantham seconded. So that's 8.41%. I'm going to get you to hold on to that at this moment, because we still have to receive all the information. But I just want to make sure that council understands that if we accept the 8.41, it's with the recommendations that the committee made. So, okay.
Would you like me to change my motion to that?
Well, no, because I know that last week there was some discussion about a few things. And so I just didn't know if on further reflection that things wanted to be looked at again. But certainly we've had some fulsome discussion from our department heads. So I'm hoping that there's a better understanding of how those recommendations were made to get us to the 8.41. So maybe while you're contemplating that, what am I doing? Which ones? Yep.
So the motion would be just to receive Bill's presentation for information, as well as all of the items 4B and then 5A through 5M, which are just the department presentations.
Just receiving for information at this point. So that's just receiving Cindy's report, Bill's report, and all of the budgets and the committee recommendations. Councillor Smybert, are you moving that? Okay, perfect. And I just need a seconder. Councillor McGuire. All in favor? And that's carried. And then it would take us to then Brian or Councillor Ropp's recommendation. So you're looking to make the motion to that the necessary bylaws be introduced at the March 28th, 2023 meeting of council to approve the 2023 draft budget as presented.
Correct.
Okay. So that's Councillor Ropp and Councillor Grantham. Okay. And then I would ask, is there any further discussion on that? Okay, all in favor? And that's carried. I do need a motion at 2:28 to rise from the committee of the whole. Councillor Brennan and Councillor Clark. All in favor? And that's carried. And then a motion to adjourn, still at 2:28. Counselor McGuire, Counselor Grantham. All in